Okay, good afternoon. I think we're live. We'll wait a few minutes for people to log on. A lot to talk about from over this pretty amazing weekend on a not just political scale, but the news today about a vaccine is pretty significant. And we'll talk about some of the impacts of that and what we expect will happen. As you know, we like to talk about the market as well. The market's a big part of most people's lives with our 401ks and retirement, things of that nature. So we'll look at that impact as well today. We'll just give it a minute and then we'll come back. It looks like Trump fired somebody by tweet today. This is going to be interesting. All right, so good afternoon. It's 4:01 on Monday, November 19th. Fred, welcome. It's been so long since I've seen you. And I'm Steve Mazzacane. This is the Steve Mazzacane Podcast. Thanks for joining us. It has been one hell of a weekend. And when we left on Thursday, it looked like we saw Biden taking the lead in some of these states. And then obviously it was officially called on Friday. And then over the weekend, we had his speech Saturday night, which I thought was quite good. The tone that Biden is taking is trying to bring people together. He is specifically reaching out to Trump supporters and saying we're one country. Let's work together. And, I know I have, social media feeds that have some on the far left, some on the far right, all over it. And, the question about corruption or lies or what have you, let's face a very simple fact. If the polls had showed, if the results of this election were that Trump had won, Trump would not be making any allegations of missing ballots or these lawsuits or what have you. I have no issue with saying, yes, we should count every ballot. No problem. If there's some that are wrong, so be it. But the margins are above and beyond what you would find to be irregular at this point. And Biden won. He's the next president. And speaking to many people today that were actually Trump supporters, it seems like most people have moved on, have just accepted, all right, that's fine. You had 74 million votes for Biden, 70 or so million votes for Trump. Trump had 6 or 7 million more votes than 4 years ago. This was not by any means a win for Democrats. They got Trump out. The Trump haters got him out. We get that. It was a fair race. But when it comes to the country rejecting Trump and rejecting everything he stood for and rejecting the GOP, that did not happen. The Democrats lost seats in the House, will likely lose the Senate. Now it's going to come down to a runoff where the two Republicans in Georgia are going to be significant favorites. We did see the ability of Stacey Abrams in Georgia to get her base out. Can she get that base out again? And remember, in one case, one was trailing. So even with that base coming out. So we face a country now where we have a leader that is a little more stable. Biden's history has been one of bipartisanship. He's worked well with Republicans. He's not been far left by any means. And I know people will try to paint him that way, but that was never really the case. And so it's going to be interesting seeing that move forward. Can he work with our Senate, with Mitch McConnell so far? Even before that runoff election, Pelosi's already said goal number one is get a stimulus passed. We're looking at increases in COVID. And we'll talk about a vaccine in a second. But remember, one thing to remember about the vaccine is that we're not going to see that actually used for months, likely the beginning of next year. I heard numbers about 50 million doses this year, and then obviously into the billions worldwide next year. But it's going to be a while before we see that. So when we look at the stock market, this morning you woke up and you saw the market up in pre-market activity. And then at one point, even during market activity, almost 1,600 points, which is just spectacular, just amazing. If you look at your 401k right now, you're probably up 4 or 5% on the day, and that's a good thing. And that's on because the markets are looking for something that's very specific. They want certainty. People behind the markets, people who are buying stock, people who are investing in companies, people who run companies, they want to know that they have something that they can count on. And the issue with Trump, so you never knew. You were always one tweet away from collapse, from a terrible attack. And Harley Davidson can attest to this. I believe Dodge or whatever, or GM could attest to that. If he went after you, it was sudden. It would be all over social media, and it would tank your stock. We never knew it was going to happen with foreign policy. And so now you have Biden in there, and there's a certain level of more certainty in place. On top of that, you have the Republicans likely managing the Senate. And what that means is this: Biden and the Democrats will not be able to walk in and reverse all the tax cuts that Trump passed. Many of the policies that are already passed, they're not going to be able to reverse. So if you're an investor, there are some things now that you can count on. So that on itself was likely going to mean the market was going to go up today. When we go a step further and we add in what happened with Pfizer. Now, this morning, Pfizer announced, and I'm going to get it directly from a news site here, that I want to get the wording right here. Pfizer announced a 90% rate. U.S. stocks surged for the most part on Monday after Pfizer said its COVID-19 vaccine is 90% effective, and Joe Biden was projected to be the winner of the presidential election. So, one, a vaccine is huge. Pfizer's stock is up, but I don't know how the virus wasn't already built into that. This vaccine was already built into that. So I don't know if I would short that right now. The market was up 1,610 points. So we have, in both cases, a little more certainty going forward. We have a vaccine. One major company has a vaccine that is 90% effective. On top of that, Biden is the president. It looks like he's going to lock it in. On top of that, the Republicans have the Senate, which means you're not going to have significant policy changes going forward for at least the next 2 years if Republicans hold on after that runoff election. All of those factors have combined to see what is one of the biggest days I've ever seen. I don't know if it is in history, but one of the biggest days I've ever seen in the stock market, because the market wants certainty. And so at the same time, let's just go back 1 second for this Pfizer announcement. It does not mean that we're not going to go through a winter from hell. We're going to have a winter from hell. It's going to get ugly. Restaurants are not going to survive. I've been talking all day to restaurateurs and business owners who are scared to death. We got lucky this weekend. We had weather in the 70s. People were eating outside like crazy. When that weather turns to 40, these restaurants are going out. Especially now, you have 15, 16 tables in a restaurant. You can only use 7 of them. You can't sit outside. These places cannot stay open. I think you're going to see a mass closing of restaurants, because it just doesn't make sense to stay open. You can't do it and do it at a loss, and then do it at a loss for likely the next 4 or 5 months. It's just, and I think we're going to see a situation where we have to, as communities, rise up and really support these restaurants and small businesses the best we can. The same way we did when this began. Everybody was buying gift cards like crazy. And I spoke to some restaurateurs today. That's dropped off. Even worse is some people are using the gift cards that they bought 5-6 months ago now, which means they're providing product and not getting any new money in for that. And granted, a gift card is basically a loan to that business in many, many ways to look at it, but it's hurting these businesses. So as much as there is a vaccine, as much as there's some certainty on a political level, these small businesses are going to get crushed. And, we have to make it, I know the Exchange Club and different groups, church groups, Chamber of Commerce, things of that nature, we're working very hard, but there is a second wave coming. So even with the vaccine coming, and everybody's thinking, okay, the vaccine's here, and in a month we'll be able to take the masks off and everybody get back to normal. That's not what's going to happen. I don't think you're going to see anything close to that till March or April. So you have 5 or 6 months for restaurants who are not going to make it through. That said, there is an obligation on restaurants to do the right thing, to make sure they make smart business decisions during this time. Market correctly, get the word out, correct branding, for example. Set up takeout items. If you have 1 million items, and I know John from the Diner just said, thank you. John, I completely support the Diner. But we have to find better ways and make it easier for people to buy products. So instead of having 1 million items on it, here's a special program for dinner, a special program for lunch, a special takeout item. Let's make it easy for the public. At the same time, the public has to step up and make sure that they're helping out these restaurants. You will lose them. And I spoke to, I'm not kidding, 4 different restaurant owners today that were scared. Even with the news, even with the vaccine, were scared they would not survive the next few months. They've already been killed, crushed for the last 6 months. And so it's going to be very, very difficult. So what I think is going to happen, and we'll talk to maybe the first selectman and the Chamber of Commerce and see if we can start up again some of these programs. I was pushing gift cards, pushing those gift cards again. And if you are able, if your 401k just went up 5% or 10% in the last week, spend some money on takeout. Even if it's, once or twice a week, spend some money on takeout. It's going to be restaurants, especially. The hospitality industry is destroyed. So it's interesting when we look at stocks today, what went up and what went down. So all of the stocks, all of the stay-at-home stocks. So for example, Zoom, Amazon, anything that went up as you were forced to stay home, those stocks dropped today. They'll recover. Amazon will be fine. Zoom will be fine. The question is, what is the new normal? So if you're a coffee shop in the morning and suddenly half the people that used to get up and go to work in the morning are now working from home, or if you're a restaurant that fed off of an airport or a high traffic area, but there is no more business travel, how much of that is going to be returning in a few months or 6 months, and how much of that will never return? And you have to ask yourself that question. The world we live in is about to change. And we're not going to just run back to the way we were. Ask you, in a month or two, are you going to be okay going to the movie theater? If 20% of people have the vaccine, are you going to be okay sitting in a theater? If it's 40%, if it's 60%, if it's 80%, at what point are you going to be okay going back to normal? And in our communities, we have people who worked at those movie theaters, worked at those concession stands, worked at obviously all those restaurants. So the real life impact is going to be significant and for a long time. We're going to come across Christmas. Think about all of the places that used to host Christmas parties, whether it's a local diner, small ones, or in Brantford, Donovan's Reef has places, or Eli's, or the Elks Club, or all these places where would host these gatherings. You're not going to have any of those gatherings. All of that revenue is gone. Some of those are nonprofits, is gone. It's not coming back anytime soon. And so many businesses and so many restaurants made their money, a large portion of their money, during holiday season. That's not going to get fixed. So it's spectacular news today. As someone who buys and sells stock and day trades, it is spectacular news today. It's a great day to be active in the market and to watch the news and to see what's going on. And the certainty we had over the weekend with the political news is significant. That changes it. At the same time, it doesn't mean those real impacts aren't going to be almost magnified going forward, entering the winter season. If we had this, if this hit in April, we'd say, okay, these restaurants can survive this. They can sit outside. A lot of things they can do. That's simply not happening. So we have to rethink on a local level how we're going to address the business community that we are seeing suffer tremendously. I saw one over the weekend who was basically in tears. They had poured everything into a business. It's not in the greatest location to begin with, but they poured everything into a business and said, what do we do? People just aren't eating out as much anymore. They're not going out as much anymore. In a town like Brantford, and Guilford as well, but especially Brantford, we're a senior town. So the people who are not going out are seniors. And that's a massive amount of revenue for these restaurants. So yes, some really, really good news today. But at the end of the day, doesn't mean we're anywhere out of the woods. And for many people, it's about to get much worse. But let's talk about Trump. And I know for some people, we've kind of moved on. I haven't seen a ton of gloating. I think the election results are far too close for anybody to gloat, but Trump is gone. All right. He'll be out of office pretty soon. This refusing to concede or give a concession speech and fight in court. All right. You have every right to do that, but the margins are too big that you're going to see a significant change. What's important to remember, though, is this. When you run for office, you're running. A large part of being president or any significant seat is the history of that seat, is a tradition of who we are as a nation. And this idea of a peaceful transfer, the fact that he has not at least come out and said, yes, I guarantee you we're going to have a peaceful transfer, is troubling. And this is what he is. He's a difficult person. But if you're a Trump supporter, at what point do you say, okay, I appreciate some of the things he did. I like that he shook up the system. I like that he was an outsider. But this idea that we're not going to guarantee the peaceful transfer of power, the idea that we're not going to call on people to come together as a nation, the idea that our history of presidents doing that on both sides of the aisle doesn't mean anything. You can shake up a system, you could shake up a business, you could shake up a political party, but there are still some things that are greater than any one party. And the issue I see with Trump, and granted, I was not a Trump supporter. I've said that many times. I didn't hate Trump. There's some things I thought that were good. I still agree with him for the most part on the China war. There's other aspects that I didn't think were crazy. I did think in many aspects the media was against him. But who we are as a nation is bigger than that. It's bigger than this one man's ego. I mean, the reports where his son-in-law was going to him saying, guys, it's time to concede. And he's refused. And so we're sending lawyers to 5 or 6 different states. What are the odds of such a massive conspiracy that in 5 or 6 states, suddenly ballots just showed up at enough to make the difference? What are the odds of that? None. It's not going to happen. And we say this, Steve, kind of like the Dems boycotted the inauguration 4 years ago. Okay. I'm not telling you one party is better than the other. I'm not telling you Dems are better than Republicans. Dems are full of it too. I can give examples of that. Listen, here are the things we heard about for the last. I give a great example today. Just on Chris Murphy announced that there's some money for either Pratt and Whitney or Electric Boat or something for military spending. If you talk to any Democrat 5-6 years ago, all they talked about was cutting military spending, cutting military spending, cutting military spending, and now we're praising military spending in our own states. That's hypocrisy. Dems do it too. 4 years ago, all we heard about was this attack on immigration, this attack on immigration, this attack on immigration. You know what the Democrats found out? That's a losing argument. Many people, including immigrants, want us to fight and put up a wall and fight against illegal immigration. So how many times in this entire election did you hear any references to immigration from Democrats? None. So we're not pretending here that one side is better than the other, like Dems did 4 years ago. Yes, that's what political parties do. But it just so happens that when an election happens, no matter how nasty that election is, no matter how ugly, no matter what the insults that are yelled, and Trump can certainly do that with the best of them, when the election is done, and we know this is done, you stand up and say, as a country, we come together. We get behind the person who won. Why? Because it's in the best interest of the country. Now, did Dems get behind Trump? No. Did they try to make his life difficult from day one? Yep. Did the Republicans ever get behind Obama? No. They try to make his life difficult from day one? Yep. But it doesn't make it right. Period. And Trump's a little worse because he didn't get his 2 terms. Right? It's been many years since, what was it, the first Bush, that someone did not get a second term. So we get it. And someone with his type of ego, we get. But it's a sad day when the president of the United States can't stand up and say, listen, we lost the election. Joe Biden's the president-elect. Get behind the guy the country chose. You can't partake in an election. I want to run for office and I'm going to go become president while complaining constantly about the process. You chose to partake in the process. You chose to be a part of this. And so this nonsense of fighting, there is no way that looking at the difference in these votes, that can be made up in those swing states. It's not going to happen. And by the way, the insults and the attacks that you're seeing are against Republicans running some of these polls, doing some of the counting. Some people, you're going to see judges that he appointed that may hear these things that aren't going to side with him. So at what point do you just say enough is enough? Okay, not everybody's Al Gore. And Democrats got an Al Gore for not fighting longer. We get it. But it's too much. It's time to actually be a president. And I'll tell you this. I believe that if Trump is still in decent health, I don't know if he's in good health now, but if he's in decent health in 4 years, he'll want to run again. If he gets up like a man, like a classy person, like a president, and says this race is over, we're going to drop all these lawsuits, we're going to get behind Biden, and we're going to be the loyal opposition for the next 4 years, his chances 4 years from now will be astronomically better than they will be without. He keeps up this fight and he does the same bluster he's been doing for the last 4 years, and he continues that and doesn't show level of grace that every former president has shown. He's destroying his future. Now, I don't think he cares. He has money. It may not be a big deal to him. It just is, he feels he's bigger than the country and our traditions and who we are. But he has that choice in front of him, and it's a massive choice because it can drastically impact what his ability is going forward. Volker, yep, because illegal immigration impacts the legal one. Yes, it does. Every time you grant more quotas for illegal immigration, they're being removed from legal quotas. I approached our senators on this several times, but there's no glory in that, I guess. So the immigration issue is a massive issue that no one wants to touch right now. And let's face facts. Obama exported a lot of immigrants. A lot of them. Other presidents, Democrats, talked about a border wall. Trump did it. They talked about higher security on the border. Obama drastically increased police on our border. Trump did too. Trump moved forward with the wall. I heard not Biden. I didn't hear anybody talk about take down the border wall. No one. So not for a second do I want to pretend that I'm playing a game where Republicans are hypocritical and Democrats are not. They're all hypocritical. This is the game. But after an election, the game ends, even if it's just for a few months. Because the peaceful transfer of power is what we are. All these other countries, you have coups and wars and battles. Some are peaceful, but not always. America has had a peaceful transfer of power every 4 years, or every 8 years, depending on the second term or not. Kathy, they are still counting votes. Election integrity should be important to all of us. Kathy, they will be counting votes for a few more weeks. Every election, they'll be counting votes for a long time. When the difference in the ballots is greater than the amount of ballots left to count, the race is over. If you're up by 20 and there's 18 ballots left to count, the race is over. You can't possibly make up that difference. You don't say, well, I'm going to fight to the bitter end. No. What you want to do as a politician, as an American who wants to put the country first, is you say, hold on a second. I can't win this. I accept that. Let's keep the divisiveness to a minimum. Election season's over. We move on. And Trump would be helping the country and helping 70 million people who voted for him by doing that. Would everybody accept it? Of course not. There'll still be people fighting. There'll still be people who think it's corrupt and it's crazy and whatever. But I assure you that had Trump won, those same people would not be saying, hey, it's corrupt. So you can't really have corruption there if it's only corrupt based on the outcome that you didn't like. That's not corruption. That's not somebody stealing an election. When he's tweeting on election day, the Democrats are stealing an election, or the day after, there's something not right there. And I'm someone who would defend him if he could be defended here. In this case, it doesn't make any sense. And he's delaying the healing of the country. Now, we have two major political parties. John, I don't know if you missed the first part of this podcast, but you mean like the Democrats. Democrats, Republicans do the same shit, guys. I'm not taking a side. It just so happens right now the president is Republican, and he's the one doing it. And previous presidents, like George H.W. Bush, when he lost, he got up and said, we need the country to come together. And he was helpful to the next one, period. So there's nothing. Did the Democrats say, not my president, a million times? Yeah, they did for the last 4 years. Did the Republicans say the same thing for the last 8 years? Yep, said it. It's not true. He's your president. That's how it works. But Trump has an opportunity, if he wants a future political career, to do the right thing in this situation. And the last president who was in this situation, George H.W. Bush, did the right thing. I don't see that from Trump. And the incessant tweeting is crazy. So at the end of the day, the question we have to ask ourselves, and it just feels this way, it appears that even those who supported Trump and voted for Trump have kind of accepted this. There's always going to be some outliers. Let's move on. It's time. And combined with that politically, we have spectacular news today. And the news about a virus, about a vaccine, is significantly more important than the race. Because hopefully it'll save lives. It adds stability at a time when we have not had stability all year. John Mancini or Kathy, we didn't have mail-in voting back then. Okay, that's true. We always had absentee voting, but we didn't have at this level. That's true. That's why we're taking so long to count the votes. So again, you can count the votes forever, but if there's fewer votes outstanding than the difference in the race, it's not relevant. John Mancini, 3 SCOTUS justices were Bush's lawyers for the election in 2000. Okay, so I get it. They certainly ruled with him. Okay. This is going to be an epic SCOTUS ruling. This is not going to the Supreme Court. There's nothing here. Listen, 2000 was about 1 county and a couple hundred vote difference. This is nowhere remotely close to that. It's not even in the same ballpark. Nowhere. Not even close. It's not going to the Supreme Court. I don't know what the path would be to get. It's not going to happen. You can try, but it's not. Joe Biden's our next president. That's life. And we're helping ourselves and helping our country if we just end the crap. All right, John, don't watch this. If you want to come in and argue with everything and you have legitimate points, bring them. But if it's just, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot, we're going to the Supreme Court, okay, don't watch this. Rush Limbaugh still has a show. I don't know, does he? Does Rush Limbaugh still have a show? I never watched him, but maybe he does. Go watch that. That's not what this is supposed to be. We talk honestly about politics and news and the markets and what we talk about. I'm not going to pick a side, and I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'll tell you what. Pay me $20,000. Give me a thing. I'll do a recording for you, and you can listen to it whenever you want. Until then, go listen to Rush Limbaugh. If you're a Democrat and you want to hear Democrats talk to you, go listen to MSNBC. This is crazy. We had this last Thursday. You're repeating Republican talking points. Okay. Don't listen. I don't repeat Republican talking points. Then we have people, you're crazy on healthcare. Okay. Either you come back with something intelligent, logical, that makes sense, but simply repeating this is going to be an epic decision in the Supreme Court. It's not going to the Supreme Court. This is nowhere remotely close to that level. Not even in the same ballpark. 1 county with a couple hundred vote difference versus 5 or 6 states with tens of thousands of vote difference. Stop. Grow up. All right, we will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, I have promised to start talking about some local things now that this election's over. We're going to start talking about some state issues. Some might be good news for our local area when it comes to representation in Hartford. And we'll talk about local development as well. We're getting a lot of questions on local development. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So tomorrow will be pretty much focused on Connecticut and the shoreline as opposed to national politics. Guys, thanks for joining me. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. As always, any questions or issues that you'd like me to talk about or we could explore or research together, send an email in. I'd be glad to do so. I will talk to you all tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night.